Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in this episode, we are going to start off by making additional progress on the fuel surge tank for the Supra. Now I'm going up to Accelerated tomorrow to go check on progress and to wrap up some more of the work that is on my shoulders to complete before we can start the car up. So here is the surge tank. If you guys remember from the last video, we got to this point with it, and we have one out of the 4 bungs installed into it. This is the outlet of it that will feed the mechanical fuel pump, and we still need the inlet from the lift pump and the 2 return bungs put into it, but I'm going to wait to put those in until later, as I really want to make sure that I get the correct locations for them, where I can actually run the lines throughout the car rather than putting the bungs and backing myself into a corner that I can't get out of. So what we are going to do to begin this video is I went ahead and I ordered this Earl's cap, and we're going to put a cap on the surge tank. Now, the reason that I want to do this is A, so I can coat the inside of the surge tank and make sure that I get application across the entire surface area on the inside, as well as giving myself an inspection port should I need to inspect the inside of the tank for any reason. So this is an Earl's cap, obviously. It's a 12-bolt flange, and we are going to install this cap onto the tank now, and then we can move forward with it from there. So I guess I can go ahead, and since I already have my center point marked, I can use a hole saw and punch the initial hole into this, and then use the ID of the flanged portion of this cap to mark out where that hole needs to be tailored, or to the size that it needs to be tailored, so that way we have a nice fit between the cap and the tank. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get our initial hole punched into the tank, and then we can keep progressing from there. There we go, have our bolt circle put in place, and you can see down in there all the cutting debris and drilling debris and grinding debris from making all of these holes and deburring them. However, I'm going to leave that debris in there for the time being, as there will be more that will be produced as I put the other bungs in place. But for the time being, at least, we can go ahead and get the flange put on here. Now, if you can see right there between those 2 holes, I marked out essentially where the cap sits as you tighten it down, and that is perpendicular to this outlet port right here that runs parallel to the firewall. So what the bottom line is by the time that I thread this cap into its flange base, it should be sitting pretty much parallel with, or the text will be riding parallel with the firewall, and it will be nice and visible from the foremost vantage point of the engine bay. So just a little bit of attention to detail I like to take into account when putting threaded caps or anything like that on. So I guess now we can go ahead and put this flange on. I will check and make sure all my bolt holes still line up. Hopefully the drill bit didn't walk around too much, as I didn't have a great way to hold this thing as I was drilling it. But let's go ahead and see if this is even close to fitting. there we are. So the cap sits exactly how I wanted it to, and it has an O-ring seal on it, so you have a little bit of wiggle room as far as being able to tighten it a little bit more, but it's running pretty well parallel to this outlet bung, if not needing to be tightened just a hair more, which is exactly how I wanted this to come together. So I only have 2 of the fasteners tight, the rest just kind of go in and out. And off camera, I did have to run the drill bit through a number of the holes. Drilling by hand the way that I did, there's almost no way to make sure that you are precisely drilling the hole where it needs to be. But I was able to get 2 of the fasteners in place, which should be these 2 right here. Tightened those down and then drilled the rest of the holes out to suit. So all is well there. And this thing is now ready to go up to accelerated and be at least mocked in its home, so I can figure out the mounting strategy that I'm going to employ for it. But I think that obviously is a task for tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these loose bolts out, put them in the bag of fasteners right there so I don't lose any of them. And then come tomorrow, we can get up to accelerated and mock this thing in place and see exactly how the rest of it needs to come together. Alright, so when I went up to accelerated this time, I did not go ahead and film anything, or at least not any voiceovers, so I'm going to try out my new microphone and I will do a voiceover now. So just got sidetracked with the work that I had to do there, and the fact that they were playing podcasts, I believe, and I didn't want to disturb them and disturb their workday, so I opted to just film a few clips, and I would do a voiceover later. So let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so to start things off, I went ahead and I installed the 3 sensors in the side of the radiator. On the bottom here, we have the sensor for the SPAL electric fan. So that sensor is what dictates to the fan what it needs to do in terms of the temperature that it sees. It will either ramp up or ramp down the fan based off of the temperature that sensor is seeing. So a pretty neat little system that way. And then right above it we have the coolant temperature sensor. So that's pretty self-explanatory. That tells the ECU what temperature the coolant is at, and depending on which thresholds that you have set in the ECU's parameters, it will affect the tune based off of how warm the engine is. And then above that we have a 150 psi pressure sensor, and the purpose of that sensor is to sense coolant pressure. So the reason that you'd have pressure introduced into the cooling system would be if you lifted the head or somehow cylinder pressure is making its way into the cooling system. So if that's happening, you know that the head is no longer sealed to the block and you have bigger issues at foot rather than anything else. So we have the 3 sensors in the side of the radiator there. And I also went ahead and I had purchased a Wilson Manifolds throttle cable bracket. Now, obviously I could have made this myself, but seeing that they offer a ready-made solution that is designed to work with their product, I opted to go ahead and order the Wilson piece. And as you can see right here, that throttle blade and the throttle cam fit perfectly in their bracket. So they have this piece engineered to work perfectly with their throttle body, and it also works with a low car throttle cable, which is what I am running on this car. So moving past that, the final sensor that I installed, as you can see right here, is another 150 psi pressure sensor in the top side of one of the wastegates. And what that does is senses obviously the pressure in the top of the wastegate or the dome, and based off of the pressure that it sees there, you can build a boost map. Say you have 100 psi in the top of the wastegate, and that equates to 50 psi in the actual manifold. So you know at that point what the relationship is between dome pressure and boost pressure, and you can begin to build your boost map based off of that data. Alright, and here we can see the surge tank mocked up in place. You can see the outlet bung there on the side, as well as the nice piece of cardboard, or the cardboard box rather, that is sitting to, or that is acting to hold that in place. So you can see the nice outlet angle that the outlet of the surge tank has, and that line will run along the firewall, along the backside of the engine, underneath of the intake manifold, and then up to the mechanical pump that's driven off of the intake cam gear. Here we can see the little coolant nipple, or I guess you can't really see it, but you can see the hose end sticking off the top of it. If you remember a few videos ago, I made a little coolant nipple that threads into the back side of the cylinder head, and it acts essentially as the same thing that a steam port does on an LS engine, being that it allows a path of egress for hot coolant or any steam or anything like that that would otherwise be consolidated on the backside of the cylinder head. You don't want that. You don't want to cook any portion of the engine. So, and I made a little fitting. You can see me touching right there, and that line will come out of the backside of the head, obviously, and more than likely snake its way around to the fill pot that hangs off of the side of the head for that coolant to be reintroduced to a more forward position of the cooling system and make its way through the radiator to be cooled off and then circulated back through the engine. And then we arrive at the dry sump belt. So this is not a problem with the belt itself, but rather a problem with me and the measurements that I was going off of to order this belt. So it's a nice Jones Racing belt. You can see the part number there, 630 HDK, and the belt is exactly what Jones advertises. However, it was not the correct size, width, or length for the belt track for the dry sump drive. So, see, it goes on the ground, thumbs down, and that is not a thumbs down for Jones. That's a thumbs down for Alex. And I already went ahead and I ordered a new belt for it, and that will be in the next few days, so I can go and test fit that the next time I'm up at Accelerated, and either validate or invalidate the new belt. And here we can see some of the wiring that Russ has been doing. You can see all the different wires ran everywhere, and it looks like a nightmare to try to do that. So Russ is certainly the man for the job, and you can see some of the stuff, like you can see the Racepak V-net connector there. You can see that that multifunction light switch that I got from Racewire Solutions up around the cowl area, the Racepak universal CAN adapter box there. You can see the Pro EFI mounted in its place, and you can see the engine harness off of there, and everything is looking awesome. Here you can get a little bit better view of the engine harness going up to the bulkhead connector. And that is I can't remember the number of pins that Russ said that connector is comprised of, but it's a very large number of pins, and we used all but one of them. So it ended up being a pretty large amount of wires to make this thing work, but thankfully we had one extra, and thankfully we didn't use the entire thing and have to put another connector in there and add more expense and more complexity to the wiring project that this car is undergoing. I also went ahead and I blocked off 2 coolant ports on the side of the cylinder head. You can see that they sit right on the side of the head, I guess where the water neck, where the water outlet would be, and those 2 were not plugged, and then it would have made a gigantic mess, and we would have been scratching our heads most likely as to where the fluid was coming from. So the small one, I believe, is an M12 by 150 thread, and the large one, I believe, is an M16 by 150. So if any of you guys need to block those coolant ports off for any reason on a 2JZ GE head, or I guess specifically a 2JZ GE non-VBTI head, those should be the measurements for those plugs. You can get them through Vibrant Performance, and you'll save yourself a whole lot of headache and heartache by just plugging those up if you aren't using them. And now we get to the coolest part of the visit, and if you wait a second, then you can see that the lights work. So Russ went ahead and he got the chassis harness working enough to get the lights working. You can see the highs kick on there, and then walk around to the back of the car, see the tail lights kick on, and that is awesome. So the brake lights, turn signals, things like that, that is not working yet. I believe he either has to hook a switch up or it has something to do with the leach board or other switches, what have you. But those are easy lights to make work when the time comes for it. I'm just thrilled that there's some sort of life that has been breathed back into this car after all of this time. So that wrapped up the trip to Accelerated. Like I said, I did not do any talking or anything like that on camera while I was there. I was just focused on getting the work I needed to accomplish completed and spending some time with the guys and just kind of enjoying myself rather than being focused, or I guess everything being front sight focused on just need to film this, need to film that, so on and so forth. So let me know what you guys think of this voiceover type of narrative. If you like it, I can do more in the future. If you don't like it, I'll stick to my normal guns. But with that being said, I guess we'll get back to the video now and back to the grind on this fuel surge tank. We are back at the shop after the excursion up to Accelerated to go look at the wiring, knock out a few odds and ends, and most importantly to test fit the fuel surge tank and make sure that dimensioning it and building it in the SC300 ended up not being a mistake. So thankfully it was not a mistake, it fit the way that I wanted it to, and now we are back today to finish work on it. So here it is back on the bench, and what I determined is with the height and the way that everything is now, the other fittings need to be on this side of the tank over here as opposed to hedging to the top side where the cap is. It's pretty tight confines between the cap and the hood the way that it is now, so I'm going to put everything on this side over here, essentially running parallel to this outlet spout that's already installed onto the tank, and we have our 3 other bungs right here. So we're going to punch 3 additional holes and more than likely end up doing some bent tube work like we did for that outlet port on the tank already. And that's about it for right now. So the first order of business will be to remove the cap, as I don't want to mess up the anodizing or anything else on it in the process of doing all of this. And then we can go ahead, start drilling holes, start getting some tubes bent, and getting everything fit where it needs to be on the side of this tank. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it. Alright, we have 2 of the additional 3 ports that we are adding to the surge tank installed at this point, and you can see maybe on the inside some of the tube work. So these 2, I designed them to essentially be interchangeable. They can be either the return from the fuel pressure regulator to the tank, or the feed from the actual main fuel cell in the rear of the car to the surge tank. So on the inside, I'm not sure if you guys can see, let me see if I can get a light in here for you. There you go. So these 2 tubes that you can see on the camera right now, they direct back at this wall over here, whereas our outlet over here that goes to the mechanical pump siphons from way down in that bottom corner there, if you can see that. So the reason that I did that is I wanted to keep incoming fuel away from outgoing fuel, at least the inlets and outlets, that is. The reason for it, I didn't want to deal with aerated fuel making its way through the outlet and up to the mechanical pump. As I'm sure you know, air is a component of the combustion process, but I don't want air being introduced into the fuel stream. I'd rather have the turbo suck air in the way that it is supposed to. So that is the short of it, at least. Like I said, we have these 3 bungs here, and if you see, they kind of stair step down as in terms of their distance from the side of the tank here. And I wanted to do that to just try to keep them a little bit farther away, even if it is just a couple of millimeters from the header and all of the hot exhaust components. And this will end up getting some sort of heat management put on it down the road a little bit, but obviously we're still in the construction process right now. So that leaves this bung left to be installed, and this will be the return from the surge tank to the fuel cell in the rear of the car. And this will not have any tube work on the inside of it. It doesn't need it, as this will allow fuel to exit the surge tank when the fuel reaches a high point on the cell itself, or on the surge tank itself rather. But before I put that in, I'm going to disassemble the Lexus, as I did put it back together in terms of putting the catch can that resides in the same location that the surge tank will, or it will in the Supra at least. So I'll have to pull that catch can back out and use this corner of the engine bay again to determine where that final bung is going to be located, as I don't want to just throw it onto the side of the surge tank here and have it be impossible to get a line onto it. So let me go ahead, I'll get that disassembled. We can throw the surge tank into the engine bay of the Lexus and determine where that final bung will be located. There we have the 4th bung installed onto the surge tank. So if, like we said before, this rear bung sits essentially parallel to the firewall, that means this one hedges towards the front side of the tank. And I do have a reason that I put it in that location. So let me go ahead, I'll throw this back under the hood or back in the engine bay of the Lexus, and I can explain my theory and rationale for doing that. So with the surge tank mocked up under the hood of the Lexus, or in the engine bay rather, we can see how all of the fittings and all of everything here fits. So our feed or outlet from the surge tank to the mechanical pump that is located on the intake cam of the Supra. These two, which are interchangeable, one of which will be the return from the fuel pressure regulator, the other of which will be the feed from the electric pump or the lift pump in the rear of the car. And this guy right here, that will be the return from the surge tank to the fuel cell in the back of the car. Like I said over on the bench a moment ago, this bung here sits more towards the fore side, or the foremost side of the surge tank. Now, why is that? Now, my theory behind this is it has to do with G-force and fluid slosh. Now, granted, the surge tank should stay full anytime the vehicle is in operation. However, if there is an instance where that does not actually happen, I did not want the return, essentially that is the outlet of the fluid volume for this surge tank, to be located in a place where when the car accelerates hard, and if the tips of my fingers are the front of the car and my palm is the rear, when the car accelerates hard and pushes everything back towards the rear of it, I didn't want to have a path of egress for the fuel in that general vicinity. So as the car accelerates and it pushes the fuel in theory to the backside of the surge tank, it pushes it away from the outlet of the surge tank, from the surge tank to the factory tank, or not factory tank, to the fuel cell in the rear of the car, and could potentially cause a starvation issue with the surge tank and therefore the rest of the actual engine portion of the fuel system, being the injectors, the mechanical pump, the rails, and all of that. All of the important stuff to make sure that we have fuel when we have a lot of boost. So with that being placed on the front, it keeps the return or the outlet of the surge tank away from where G-force and any sloshing will be, and keeps all the fuel centralized around the outlet of the surge tank that is feeding the mechanical pump to keep everything with fuel in it and everything happy that needs fuel to cause the car to operate properly. So hopefully that explanation makes sense. I did the best I could off the top of my head, but it makes sense in my head. Hopefully it made sense to you guys. But we are done with welding for now on this, and I already tested the fitting in this bung, or in all of the bungs rather, and the fitting threads in properly, so we don't have to tap any of them, which, not that it's that big of a deal, but it makes me happy that I don't have to break my big tap out and try to hold this thing while running it into the tank. So this thing is essentially all done aside from figuring out a mounting solution, which I can't do without the car here, as I'm not going to rely on the engine bay architecture of the Lexus just in hopes that it is the same or the exact same as the Supra. I'll just wait until I can actually use the Supra to mount it, as that's obviously where that tank is destined to reside at for the duration of its life. With all that being said, I think I have just about ran out of things that I can do to this surge tank at this point in time, and therefore ran out of content for this video. So again, here is the overview of it. Very happy with how it came out, and I can't wait to test this thing out and see if my theories actually work in practice the way that they work in my head. But that being said, again, that will be the end of this video. So thank you guys as always for tuning in and watching me fiddle around here, play with different theories, experiment, and that really is what all this is just a big experiment, at least with the Supra project. So it's fun to take these theories, well, I guess to develop theories, to implement them, to test them, and to see if it's really a good litmus test of how well you understand different systems on a car and different concepts in terms of just the operation of an internal combustion engine, fluid flow systems, and so on and so forth. So that's why I enjoy doing this. Hopefully you guys enjoy tagging along for the ride and watching me succeed and or fail. I mean, something like this, it may just not work, but at least I'll be able to say now I know how to make something, if it does fail, that does not work. If it succeeds, then I know how to make something that works the way that I intended it to. But with that being said, thank you guys as always for watching, and as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.